Commander Lee Daeho stood in the observation deck of Sanctuary 7 and watched the stars through the thick metal glass. The hidden moon base had been home to 50,000 humans for 50 years now, and every day felt like a lifetime. His weathered hands gripped the rail as he remembered the day Earth went silent, and how they all thought it meant the end of everything human in the galaxy. The base hummed quietly around him with the sounds of people living their lives in secret. Children who had never seen a real sky played in the corridors while their parents worked to keep humanity alive in the darkness between worlds. These children knew nothing of Earth except the stories their grandparents told them about blue skies and green grass and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. Dr. Park Sora walked up behind him carrying a data tablet that glowed with technical drawings and numbers that most people could not understand. She had been working for months on something she called a breakthrough, but Daeho knew better than to get his hopes up. They had tried many times before to build ships that could slip past alien sensors, and each time the result was the same. The galaxy was too dangerous for humans to show themselves. "We need to talk," Sora said, and her voice was different today. There was excitement in it, mixed with something that might have been fear. Daeho turned to look at her and saw that her eyes were bright with the kind of energy that came from staying awake too long working on an impossible problem. "What is it this time?" he asked, and tried to keep the tiredness out of his voice. Sora had been his friend since before the Great Silence, and he trusted her more than anyone else on the base. But he was tired of hoping for things that could not happen. "I figured it out," she said, and held up the tablet. "The phase drive works. We can build ships that exist halfway between normal space and something else. The aliens cannot see them or track them or stop them." Daeho looked at the tablet and saw designs for ships that looked nothing like the old human vessels. These were sleek and strange, with hull plating that seemed to bend light around itself, and engines that created energy from sources he did not recognize. "Are you sure?" he asked, because he needed to be certain before he let himself believe. "I tested it on a probe 3 days ago," Sora said, and her smile was the first real smile he had seen from her in years. "It flew right past a Krelian patrol ship and they never knew it was there. We can do this, Daeho. We can finally leave this place and see what happened to our world." The words hit him like cold water, and suddenly all the tiredness left his body. For 50 years they had hidden in the dark spaces between stars while alien species carved up human territory and declared their entire race extinct. For 50 years, they had listened to reports that Earth was empty and dead, and that no human would ever again walk under an open sky. Now Sora was telling him they could change all of that. "How many ships can we build?" he asked, and his mind was already working on the possibilities. If they could build enough vessels, they might be able to contact other human survivors and maybe even take back some of what was stolen from them. "With the materials we have here, maybe 20 small fighters," Sora said. "But if we can get to the asteroid mining stations that the Valdris abandoned, we could build a whole fleet." Captain Kim Tae-min appeared at the end of the corridor and walked toward them with the steady pace of a man who had spent his life in military service. He was older than both of them, and had been one of the pilots who fought during the first Forthak attack on Earth. His face still carried the scars from that battle, and his left arm was cybernetic after the original was lost when his fighter exploded around him. "Commander," Taemin said, and gave a slight bow that was more habit than necessity. "The council is meeting in 20 minutes, and they want to hear about the new ships." Daeho nodded and looked back at Sora. "Are you ready to tell them that we might finally be able to go home?" "I am ready," she said, but her voice was quiet now. They all knew what going home might mean. Earth had been silent for 50 years, and there was no way to know what they would find there. The report said it was empty, but reports could be wrong, and even if they were right, there might still be something worth saving. The three of them walked through the corridors of Sanctuary 7 toward the council chambers where the leaders of humanity would decide whether to break 50 years of hiding. The base had been built inside a dead asteroid that drifted through empty space, far from any trade routes or military patrols. From the outside, it looked like just another piece of space rock, but inside it was a complete world with living areas, and workshops and gardens that provided food and oxygen for everyone who lived there. Other humans moved through the corridors around them, and Daeho could see the hope and fear in their faces. Word traveled fast in a closed community, and everyone knew that something important was happening. Children pressed against the walls to watch them pass while their parents whispered to each other about what the new ships might mean for their future. The council chambers were carved from solid rock and lined with metal panels that blocked any signals from getting in or out. 12 people sat around a circular table, and each one represented a different part of the human community that survived on Sanctuary 7. There were engineers and doctors and teachers and farmers and soldiers, and each one carried the weight of keeping their people alive in a universe that wanted them dead. President Lim Haiwan sat at the head of the table, and her gray hair was pulled back in a simple style that made her look older than her 60 years. She had been elected to lead the survivors when they first arrived at Sanctuary 7, and had held the position ever since, because no one else wanted the responsibility of making decisions that could mean life or death for their entire species. "Dr. Park," Haiwan said as they entered the chamber, "we understand you have something to show us." Sora activated a holographic projector in the center of the table, and the air filled with images of her new ships. The vessels looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, with their phase-shifting hulls and quantum engines and weapon systems that could strike from dimensions that normal sensors could not detect. "These ships can slip through space without being seen," Sora explained. "They use a technology that lets them exist in multiple dimensions at once, so enemy sensors just see empty space where our ships actually are." General Bei Sung-ho leaned forward and studied the hologram with the eyes of a man who had spent his life planning military operations. "How many can we build, and how long will it take?" 20 fighters in 3 months, Sora replied. "More if we can get access to better materials." "And what do you propose we do with these ships?" asked Dr. No Young-hee, who ran the medical facilities on the base. Daeho stepped forward and looked around the table at the faces of the people who would decide humanity's future. "We go home," he said. "We find out what really happened to Earth, and we start taking back what belongs to us." The silence in the room was complete and heavy. Everyone knew that breaking their 50 years of hiding was dangerous, but they also knew that staying hidden forever was just another kind of death. These ships might be their only chance to reclaim their place in the galaxy, or they might be the thing that finally brought their enemies down on them and ended the human race once and for all. President Haiwan looked at each council member in turn and saw the same mixture of hope and fear in all their faces. Then she turned back to Daeho and Sora and Taemin and made the decision that would change everything. "Build the ships," she said. "It is time to find out if humanity still has a future among the stars." 3 months later, the first human ships in 50 years slipped through the darkness toward Earth. Commander Lee Daeho sat in the pilot seat of the lead fighter and felt the strange sensation of existing in multiple dimensions at once. The phase drive made reality feel fluid around him, as if he was swimming through thick air that bent and twisted with every movement of his ship. Captain Kim Taemin flew beside him in a second fighter, while scout pilot Han Yu-jin took the third vessel on her first mission beyond the safety of Sanctuary 7. Yu-jin was barely 20 years old and had never seen anything except the inside of the asteroid base, but she flew with the natural skill of someone born for space combat. Dr. Park. Sora had stayed behind to work on building more ships, but her voice came through the quantum communication system that connected the fighters to their hidden base. "Phase drive is holding steady on all 3 ships," she reported. "No sign that anyone can detect you." The journey to Earth took 2 days, and during that time they passed through space that was supposed to be empty, but was instead filled with alien ships and stations and mining platforms. The Krelian Mining Consortium had built massive structures around every planet in the solar system, and were systematically stripping away anything of value. "Look at what they did to Mars," Taemin said, and his voice was tight with anger. The red planet was now covered with deep scars where mining ships had carved away entire mountains to get at the metals underneath. Automated factories floated in orbit around the planet and pumped out processed materials that were loaded onto cargo ships bound for Krelian space. Yu-jin was quiet as she stared at the destruction through her ship's sensors. She had grown up hearing stories about the planets of the solar system, but seeing them turned into industrial sites was different from anything she had imagined. "How could they do this to our home?" she asked. Because they thought no one was left to stop them, Daeho replied and pushed his ship toward Earth. As they got closer, he could see that his home world had suffered the same fate as Mars. Great mining platforms hovered over the continents and sucked up everything valuable while leaving behind empty holes and poisoned soil. The blue oceans were still there, but they were filled with algae farms that produced food for the alien workers who lived in floating cities above the water. The white clouds were gone and replaced with the brown smog that came from burning too much fuel and processing too many raw materials. There, Yujin said, and pointed her sensors toward what used to be the continent of Asia. I am picking up life signs that do not match any known alien species. Daeho adjusted his course and flew toward the coordinates Yujin had found. Below them was a settlement that looked different from the alien cities. The buildings were low and made from scavenged materials, but they were arranged in patterns that seemed human. Gardens grew between the structures and children played in the streets. Those are humans, Taemin said, and his voice was filled with wonder. There are still humans on Earth. They watched from orbit as people moved through the settlement going about their daily lives. Most of them looked thin and tired, as if they did not get enough food, but they were alive, and that was more than anyone on Sanctuary 7 had dared to hope. We need to make contact, Daeho decided. Yujin, take your ship down and see if you can talk to them without being detected by the alien patrols. The young pilot nodded and guided her fighter toward the surface using the phase drive to stay invisible to the Krelian sensors. She landed in a field outside the settlement and waited to see what would happen. It did not take long for humans to find her ship. A group of 5 people approached the fighter with makeshift weapons and suspicious expressions. Yujin opened her cockpit and climbed out with her hands visible and empty. Who are you? Asked an older man who seemed to be the leader of the group. His clothes were patched and worn, but clean, and his eyes were sharp and intelligent. My name is Han Yujin, and I am from Sanctuary 7, she replied. We thought Earth was empty. The man stared at her for a long moment, and then his expression changed from suspicion to amazement. You are from the moon base, he said. We thought you were all dead. It turned out that several thousand humans still lived on Earth in hidden settlements scattered across the planet. They survived by avoiding the alien patrols and salvaging what they could from the ruins of human cities. They grew their own food and made their own tools and raised their children to remember what Earth had been like before the invasion. Yujin spent 2 hours talking with the survivors and learning about their lives. They told her about other human settlements on different worlds, and about the slave labor camps where aliens forced captured humans to work in dangerous mines and factories. Colony New Busan still has over 10,000 people, the settlement leader explained. They send coded messages through the old communication relays when they can avoid detection. When Yujin returned to orbit, she brought information that changed everything the people of Sanctuary 7 thought they knew about the state of humanity in the galaxy. They were not the last survivors. There were hundreds of thousands of humans, still alive but scattered and enslaved and cut off from each other. We have to help them, Yujin said over the communication system. We cannot leave them to live like that. Daeho agreed, but he also knew that helping meant revealing themselves to the entire galaxy. The moment they started attacking alien installations, every species in known space would know that humans were still alive and still fighting. They were preparing to return to Sanctuary 7 with their new information when Yujin's ship detected a patrol of Krelian fighters approaching their position. The aliens were flying in a standard search pattern, but they were getting close to where the human settlement was hidden on the surface. They are going to find the settlement, Yujin said. We have to do something. Daeho looked at Taemin and saw the same decision in his friend's eyes. They could stay hidden and watch innocent humans be discovered and enslaved, or they could break 50 years of silence and fight back. All ships attack, Daeho ordered and switched his phase drive to combat mode. The 3 human fighters materialized out of empty space directly in front of the surprised Krelian patrol. The aliens had been expecting to find nothing more dangerous than mining equipment, but instead found themselves facing weapons technology they had never seen before. The battle was over in minutes. The human ships moved through dimensions that the Krelian sensors could not track, and fired weapons that struck from angles that seemed impossible. The alien fighters exploded one by one, until nothing was left except debris drifting through space. "Command, this is Fighter 7, came a panicked voice over the alien communication frequency. "We have engaged unknown vessels of advanced design, requesting immediate backup." Taman switched to the same frequency and spoke in perfect Krelian. "This is the human race," he said. "We are not extinct, we are coming home." The message was picked up by every alien ship and station in the solar system, and within hours it was being broadcast across the entire galaxy. Species that had not thought about humans for 50 years suddenly found themselves asking the same question. If humans were still alive, where had they been and what did they want? Admiral Yoon Ji-hee received the news at Sanctuary 7 and immediately began preparing for what she knew would come next. The galaxy would respond to the return of humanity, and that response might be peaceful or it might be violent, but it would definitely be swift. "Signal all human settlements," she ordered engineer Cho Min-ho, who was working frantically to build more of Sora's phase drive ships. "Tell them that the silence is broken and the war is beginning." The three fighters returned to Sanctuary 7, carrying information that would reshape everything the survivors thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. They were not alone, and they were not helpless, and they were not going to hide anymore. Dae-ho stood once again in the observation deck and watched the stars, but this time he was not thinking about the past. He was planning for a future where humans reclaimed their rightful place among the civilizations of the galaxy and made sure that no one would ever again declare their species extinct. The first shots had been fired, and there was no going back. Humanity had announced its return to the galaxy, and now it was time to see what the galaxy would do about it. The galaxy burned with the news that humanity had returned from extinction. Within days of the first battle at Earth, every alien species with access to faster-than-light communication knew that the supposedly dead humans were not only alive but fighting back with technology that made their ships appear and disappear like ghosts. Commander Lee Dae-ho stood in the command center of Sanctuary 7 and watched reports flood in from across human space. Colony New Busan had broken its silence and was attacking the Valdris trade stations that had enslaved their people. The mining world of Kepler 442b was in revolt as human workers turned their industrial equipment into weapons. Even the prison camps on the Outer Rim were seeing uprisings as news of the return spread. President Lim Hai-wan called an emergency session of the expanded council, which now included representatives from 12 different human settlements that had re-established contact. The holographic table in the center of the room showed a map of the galaxy, with red markers indicating every location where humans were fighting alien occupation forces. "The Galactic Council has declared us a threat to interstellar peace," General Bae Sung-ho reported as he reviewed the latest intelligence. "They are mobilizing fleets from 6 different species to contain what they call the human insurgency." Dr. Park So-ra looked up from her technical readouts and shook her head in amazement. "Our phase drive technology has them completely confused. They cannot figure out how our ships work, and that is making them panic." Tech specialist Kang Yoon-ji leaned back in her chair and smiled the dangerous smile of someone who enjoyed causing problems for enemy computer systems. "I have been monitoring their communications, and they are arguing among themselves about whether we are using some kind of dimensional technology, or if we have learned to bend space and time." "Let them argue," Dae-ho said. "The longer they spend trying to understand our ships, the more time we have to build more of them and rescue more of our people." The production facilities at Sanctuary 7 were working around the clock to build new fighters using the materials that salvage teams brought back from abandoned alien stations. Dr. So-ra had improved her original design, and the new ships were faster and more heavily armed than the prototypes that had started the war. Captain Kim Tae-min commanded a squadron of 20 fighters that were conducting hit-and-run attacks against Krelian mining operations throughout the sector. His pilots were all volunteers from Sanctuary 7 who had trained their entire lives for the chance to strike back at the aliens who had taken their worlds. Scout pilot Han Yu-jin had become something of a legend among the human resistance. Her ship had been detected by alien sensors only once, and that had been on purpose as she led a patrol of Vorthak hunters into an asteroid field where General Bae Sung-ho was waiting with a full squadron of human fighters. The Vorthak were the species that had originally attacked Earth and driven humanity into hiding. They were massive creatures with chitinous armor and multiple limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Their ships were built like living organisms, and could repair themselves even while taking heavy damage in battle. The Vorthak have returned to finish what they started, Admiral Yoon-ji Hai announced during the daily briefing. Our scouts have detected a battle fleet of over 200 ships heading toward the solar system. The news sent a chill through everyone in the command center. The Vorthak had nearly wiped out humanity 50 years ago, when the human military was at full strength and operating from established bases. Now the surviving humans had better technology, but far fewer ships and people. How long do we have? Daeho asked. 3 weeks before they reach Earth, Ji-hai replied. But they are not the only threat we face. The Krelians are assembling their own fleet, and the Galactic Council is sending peacekeeping forces to restore order to what they call the disputed territories. Engineer Cho Min-ho raised his hand and waited for permission to speak. When Haiwan nodded, he stood up and activated his own holographic display. We have been in contact with 3 alien species that are offering to help us. The Etherians say they never agreed with the declaration that humans were extinct. The Korath warrior clans respect our fighting ability and want to test themselves against the Vorthak. The Valdris merchants are angry that we have been disrupting their trade routes, but they hate the Vorthak more than they hate us. The idea of alien allies was something that no one at Sanctuary 7 had considered before the war began. For 50 years they had thought of all non-human species as potential enemies, but now it seemed that some aliens were willing to help humanity reclaim its place in the galaxy. What do they want in return? Yoon-ji asked with the suspicious tone of someone who had spent too much time dealing with enemy computer systems. The Etherians want nothing except peace, Min-ho replied. The Korath want to share battle honors with human warriors. The Valdris want exclusive trading rights to human space once we reclaim it. Daeho looked around the table at the faces of the human leaders and saw the same mix of hope and caution in all of them. Accepting alien help meant trusting species that had stood by and watched while humanity was declared extinct, but it also meant having a real chance to defeat the forces that were gathering against them. What does our intelligence say about Vorthak capabilities? He asked Yoon-ji. The tech specialist activated her own display and showed images of the approaching battle fleet. They have improved their bioships with new weapons and armor. Their fleet includes 5 dreadnought-class vessels that are each the size of a small moon. But their computer systems are still biological, and I think I can introduce viruses that will disrupt their coordination. General Sung-ho leaned forward and studied the tactical display. If we can get alien allies to engage the main Vorthak fleet, we can use our phase drive ships to strike at their command vessels while they are distracted. President Haiwan listened to the discussion for several minutes before raising her hand for silence. We are talking about making alliances with alien species and going to war with the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. This is not a decision we can make lightly. Yu-jin spoke for the first time during the meeting. The humans on Earth and the other colonies are counting on us. We cannot abandon them because we are afraid of making difficult choices. The young pilot was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The scattered human settlements had broken their silence because they believed that Sanctuary 7 could lead them to freedom. If the survivors at the asteroid base chose to hide again, then thousands of humans would die in alien retribution attacks. We fight, Daeho said. We accept help from any alien species willing to offer it, and we make the Vorthak regret that they ever heard of the human race. The decision was unanimous, and within hours Sanctuary 7 was buzzing with preparation for the largest space battle that humanity had fought since the original Vorthak invasion. Zora worked to upgrade the weapon systems on every available ship, while Sung-ho planned tactical scenarios with the alien military advisors who had arrived to coordinate the alliance. Yoon-ji spent her time developing computer viruses that could affect biological systems and testing them on captured Vorthak technology. Her programs were designed to cause confusion and panic among the alien crews while leaving their ships intact enough for human forces to capture. Timon led training, exercises that taught human pilots how to fight alongside alien allies whose ships moved differently and used different weapons. The Korath fighters were fast and aggressive, while the Etherian vessels were slow but heavily shielded, and the Valdris merchant marines were more comfortable with defensive tactics. 3 weeks later, the Vorthak battle fleet dropped out of faster, then light travel at the edge of the solar system, and found themselves facing not just the scattered remnants of humanity, but a coalition of 4 different species that had decided the galaxy was better with humans in it than without them. The Battle of Earth had begun, and this time humanity was not fighting alone. The Battle of Earth raged for 6 days and nights as human ships phased in and out of normal space, while their alien allies engaged the massive Vorthak fleet in direct combat. Commander Lee Dae-ho led a squadron of 40 phase fighters through the chaos of the battlefield as explosions lit up the darkness between planets. The Vorthak dreadnoughts were enormous living ships that grew new armor, even as human weapons carved holes in their hulls. Their biocannons fired streams of acid that could eat through any known metal, and their fighters moved like insects swarming around a hive. But tech specialist Kang Eun-ji had done her work well, and confusion spread through the alien fleet as her computer viruses disrupted their biological command systems. Their coordination is breaking down, Captain Kim Taemin reported over the communication channel as his fighters struck at a Vorthak cruiser that was spinning out of control. The bioships cannot talk to each other properly. Scout pilot Han Yujin dove her fighter through a gap between 2 dreadnoughts and launched a spread of quantum torpedoes that phased through the first ship's armor and exploded inside its vital organs. The massive vessel shuddered and began to drift as its internal systems failed. The Korath warriors fought with the savage joy of a species that lived for battle. Their ships were painted in bright colors and covered with spikes and blades that served no practical purpose except to make them look more intimidating. They charged straight at the Vorthak fleet and engaged in close combat that turned space into a whirlwind of clashing metal and exotic energy. The Etherians used different tactics and stayed at long range while their heavy weapons pounded the enemy fleet with precisely targeted strikes. Their ships were sleek and beautiful things that moved like dancers and fired beams of pure energy that could cut through any armor. The Valdris merchant marines were the most practical fighters and concentrated on capturing intact Vorthak vessels that could be salvaged for useful technology and materials. They used boarding pods to take control of damaged enemy ships and turned the captured vessels against their former allies. Admiral Yoon-ji Hye commanded the human fleet from the battleship New Seoul, which had been built in the orbital shipyards that Sora had established around Sanctuary 7. The vessel was the first human dreadnought in 50 years, and it carried enough firepower to destroy entire planets. "Focus fire on the command ship," Ji-Hai ordered, as she identified the largest Vorthak vessel in the enemy formation. "If we can take out their fleet commander, the rest of them will lose coordination completely." Ace pilot Jian In-soo acknowledged the order and guided his squadron of heavy fighters toward the Vorthak command ship. His vessels were armed with the newest weapons that Sora had developed, and they could phase through enemy shields to strike at vulnerable internal systems. The Vorthak command ship was a nightmare thing that looked more like a giant insect than any kind of spacecraft. It had multiple segments connected by flexible joints, and each segment was covered with sensor clusters that looked like compound eyes. Biocannons sprouted from its hull like thorns, and it moved through space with undulating motions that made it seem alive. In-soo led his fighters in a spiraling attack pattern that confused the enemy sensors and made it impossible for the Vorthak gunners to target them effectively. His pilots phased in and out of normal space as they struck at the command ship's vital systems and slowly carved their way toward its heart. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, the human resistance was fighting its own battle against the Krelian occupation forces. Commander Park Do-hyun led 10,000 liberated humans in an assault on the primary mining complex that had been built over the ruins of Seoul. Do-hyun had been born on Earth and had spent his entire life fighting the alien occupiers who had turned his homeworld into an industrial wasteland. His forces were armed with weapons that had been airdropped by the orbital fleet, and they knew the terrain better than their enemies did. The Krelians were not natural warriors and preferred to use automated systems and slave labor rather than fight their own battles. Their mining complex was heavily fortified, but it was designed to keep workers in rather than keep attackers out. "Breach the main gate," Do-hyun ordered, as his assault teams used phase grenades to create holes in the enemy fortifications. The explosives worked on the same principle as the ship drives, and they could pass through solid barriers before detonating. The battle for Seoul lasted 12 hours and ended when human forces captured the central control facility that coordinated mining operations across the entire planet. Do-hyun stood in the control room and watched as his people shut down the machines that had been poisoning their world for 50 years. Ambassador Song Mi-young was fighting a different kind of battle in the diplomatic chambers of the Galactic Council. She had arrived with a small escort of human ships and demanded to address the assembled representatives of 40 different species. The Extinct Species Protocol is a violation of basic rights, Mi-young declared as she stood before the alien delegates. Declaring an entire race dead without proof is not justice, and using that declaration to justify theft and slavery is a crime against civilization itself. The council chamber erupted in arguments as different species took sides on the question of whether humanity deserved to reclaim its former territory. The Etherians supported human rights while the Krelians insisted that 50 years of occupation gave them legal claim to former human worlds. The humans have shown that they are not extinct, said the Etherian representative in a voice that sounded like music. They have also shown that they have the strength to reclaim what was taken from them. The council should recognize their sovereignty before this war spreads beyond their former borders. The Krelian delegate was a slug-like creature that spoke through a mechanical translator. The humans abandoned these territories when they chose to go silent. We have invested 50 years of development, and we will not surrender our property to terrorists who hide behind phantom ships. Mi-young waited for the arguments to die down before she spoke again. We did not abandon our worlds. We were driven into hiding by the Vorthak invasion, and we survived in secret while you divided our territory among yourselves, like scavengers feeding on a corpse. The debate continued for days, while the battle in Earth's solar system reached its climax. The Vorthak command ship was finally destroyed when Insu managed to phase a nuclear warhead directly into its central nervous system. The massive vessel convulsed once, and then broke apart as its biological components died. With their command structure disrupted, the remaining Vorthak ships lost coordination and began to retreat. Some tried to escape to faster than light speed, but the human and alien alliance was ready for them, and few enemy vessels managed to leave the battlefield intact. General Bae Sung-ho surveyed the aftermath of the battle and felt a satisfaction that he had not experienced since the original Vorthak invasion. The species that had nearly destroyed humanity had been defeated, and their fleet was either destroyed or captured. The galaxy would know that humans could defend themselves and their allies. "What are our losses?" Daeho asked as he reviewed the casualty reports. 30% of our fighters and 15% of our capital ships, Sung-ho replied. "But we captured over 50 Vorthak vessels intact, and the Valdris say they can convert them to human use within a few months." The victory at Earth was just the beginning. Human forces launched simultaneous attacks on Krelian mining operations throughout the galaxy while their alien allies provided support and coordination. Within weeks, dozens of former human worlds were liberated, and their populations were freed from 50 years of slavery. Dr. No Young-hee led teams of scientists to each liberated world and began the long process of repairing the environmental damage that the aliens had caused. Her terraforming technology could restore poisoned soil and polluted water, but it would take years to undo 5 decades of industrial exploitation. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change. The species that had been declared extinct had returned with new technology and powerful allies, and they were determined to reclaim their rightful place among the stars. But victory came with its own problems, and Daeho knew that the hardest battles were still ahead of them. Building a new human civilization would be more difficult than defeating the aliens who had tried to destroy the old one. 10 years had passed since the Battle of Earth, and the galaxy was a different place than it had been when humanity emerged from its long silence. Fleet Admiral Shin Jae-wook stood on the bridge of the flagship Phoenix Rising and watched as the newest human colony ships departed for unexplored systems beyond the rim. The Phoenix Rising was the most advanced vessel that human technology could produce, and it served as the mobile command center for the Terran Federation fleet. Its hull was made from materials that had been developed during the war years, and its weapons could phase through any known defense system. Commander Lee Dae-ho was now an old man with gray hair and hands that shook slightly from decades of piloting spacecraft through impossible battles. He served as senior military advisor to the Federation Council, and his word carried more weight than any other human voice when it came to matters of war and peace. Dr. Park Sora had become the most famous inventor in the galaxy, and her phase drive technology had revolutionized space travel for every species that could afford to license it from human manufacturers. She worked from a research station that orbited the restored Earth, and her latest projects included ships that could travel between dimensions and weapons that could destroy entire star systems. The galaxy had accepted humanity's return, but that acceptance had come at a price. 3 species that had participated in the occupation of human worlds were now required to pay reparations that would continue for the next century. The Krelian mining consortium had been dissolved and its assets distributed among the human survivors, who had been enslaved in their facilities. President Lim Hai-wan had been re-elected to lead the Terran Federation for the 3rd time, and she ruled from the rebuilt capital city of New Geneva, on Earth. The planet's skies were blue again, thanks to the terraforming work that Dr. No Young-hee had led over the past decade. The oceans teemed with life that had been restored from genetic samples that human scientists had preserved in the hidden archives of Sanctuary 7. Forests grew where mining pits had once scarred the landscape, and cities rose from the ruins of the old civilization. But not everyone was happy with the changes that humanity's return had brought to the galaxy. Some human survivors wanted revenge against every alien species that had participated in the occupation, while others believed that the Federation should focus on exploration and peaceful expansion rather than military dominance. Captain Lee Bora represented the new generation of humans who had grown up during the war years and seen both the worst and best that different species could offer. She commanded the exploration vessel New Horizon, and her crew included humans and aliens working together to map the unexplored regions of the galaxy. Bora was the daughter of Commander Dae-ho, and she had inherited his tactical skills and his ability to inspire loyalty in people who served under him. But she had also inherited her mother's diplomatic nature, and her belief that cooperation was better than conquest. "We have detected a distress signal from an unknown species," reported her science officer, who was an Etherian named Sai-Lin. "The signal is coming from a system that is not on any of our star charts." Bora studied the sensor readings and saw that the signal was weak and intermittent, as if it was being transmitted by equipment that was damaged or running low on power. "Set course for the source of the signal," she ordered. "Maximum speed." The New Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of an unexplored star system and found itself looking at something that no human or alien had ever seen before. A massive structure floated in the space between planets, and it was clearly artificial but built using principles that none of the known species understood. "It appears to be some kind of habitat," Sai-Lin reported as she analyzed the sensor data. "The structure is generating its own gravity and atmosphere, and there are life signs aboard, but the readings do not match any species in our databases." Bora felt the excitement of discovery that had driven human explorers for centuries. This was why the Federation had built ships like the New Horizon and sent them beyond the mapped regions of the galaxy. There were still mysteries to solve and new civilizations to meet. "Open a communication channel," she ordered. "Let them know that we received their distress call and that we are here to help." The response came quickly, and it was transmitted in a mathematical language that the ship's computers could translate. The beings who lived in the structure called themselves the Architects, and they had been drifting through space for thousands of years after their homeworld was destroyed by a cosmic disaster. "We have lost the ability to repair our habitat," the Architect spokesman explained through the translation system. "Our population is dying, and we do not know how to save ourselves." Bora made the decision that would define her career and perhaps change the course of galactic history. "We will help you," she said. "The Terran Federation has experience with rebuilding civilizations and restoring damaged worlds." The rescue of the Architects became a joint operation involving ships and personnel from 4 different species. Human engineers worked alongside Etherian scientists and Korath warriors and Valdris merchants to repair the ancient habitat and restore it to full function. The project took 6 months, and when it was finished, the Architects had not only survived but had shared their advanced knowledge of physics and engineering with their rescuers. The technology they provided would allow humanity to build ships that could travel between galaxies and weapons that could protect entire star systems from any threat. Ambassador Song Mi-young had been appointed as the Federation's representative to the Galactic Council, and she worked to establish trade agreements and mutual defense pacts with species throughout known space. Her diplomatic success had helped to ensure that humanity would never again face the kind of isolation that had nearly led to their extinction. "The galaxy is at peace," she reported during the annual Federation Assembly. "Trade is flourishing, and exploration is expanding our understanding of the universe. Humanity has taken its place as one of the leading civilizations in known space." But even as she spoke those words, Mi Young knew that peace was fragile, and that new threats could emerge from the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. The Federation maintained the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and human ships patrolled the trade routes and defended the colonies that were being established on distant worlds. Tech specialist Kang Yoon-ji had become the director of Federation intelligence, and her network of agents and monitoring systems kept watch for any sign of danger. Her early warning systems had detected the approach of hostile fleets and prevented several conflicts before they could escalate into full-scale wars. "We have learned to be vigilant," Yoon-ji explained to a group of newly graduated intelligence officers. 50 years of hiding taught us that survival depends on knowing what your enemies are planning before they know it themselves." The lessons of the war years had not been forgotten, and human space was defended by the most advanced technology that Federation scientists could develop. Phase drive ships patrolled the borders while automated defense platforms protected important worlds and space stations. General Bae Sung-ho had retired from active military service, but he continued to train the next generation of human officers at the Federation War College. His students learned not only the tactics of space combat, but also the importance of building alliances and maintaining diplomatic relations with other species. "Strength without wisdom is tyranny," he taught them. "We fought to reclaim our freedom, not to dominate others." Commander Daeho stood once more on the observation deck of what had once been Sanctuary 7, but was now a memorial to the humans who had died during the 50 years of exile. The asteroid base had been converted into a museum where visitors could learn about the dark years when humanity had almost vanished from the galaxy. Children who had never known war or hiding played in the corridors that had once echoed with the sounds of desperate preparation for battles that might never be won. Their laughter was the sound of a future that the survivors of Sanctuary 7 had fought to make possible. The memorial wall listed the names of 50 billion humans who had died during the Vorthak invasion and the long years that followed. But beside it stood a new wall that listed the names of the species that had helped humanity reclaim its place among the stars. Daeho touched the wall and remembered all the people who had sacrificed everything so that humanity could have a future. Then he turned toward the viewing port and looked out at the stars that were no longer dark, with the fear of extinction. Human ships moved through space carrying explorers and diplomats and merchants to worlds that had never known the touch of human feet. The galaxy belonged to all its children now, and humanity had earned its place through courage and determination, and the refusal to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. The skies belonged to humanity once more, but this time they were shared with friends who had proven that the universe was large enough for all civilizations to prosper together.